And as I said, I guess we somehow missed the recording piece on the front end. We also created a dashboard for our board of directors and our audit and risk committee. It obviously was not practical for our board of directors and audit and risk committee to pour through literally the thousands of comments that we received from our members on a quarterly basis. So part of the job of not only our team that we work with, but also the ethics committee is to dissect those, to review those, to highlight those that are concerning and that might actually touch upon concerning ethical topics, and to present those to our board of directors and our audit and risk committee in a very transparent and productive fashion. What you see here is an actual page from one of our dashboard presentations to our board of directors and audit and risk committee that displays the trends that we are seeing throughout 2021, the comments that we deem are worthy of board of director or audit and risk committee review, and any trends that we might be seeing. And on the, I'm going to move my camera strip there a bit so I can see the categorization. As you can see in Q1 of Q3, we did make some technology changes throughout the year that actually impacted our members' feedback greatly. And that's why that system and technology bar that you see is much higher than the other categories of feedback items that we would have received. And if you could advance the slide, Tammy. And this is the segment of our dashboard that we display to our members that, excuse me, to our audit and risk committee and board of directors that really refers to the employee tracking that we do. We do, just like we track our feedback that we receive from our members, we track very copiously the feedback that we receive from our employees. And as you might expect, some of those comments or complaints that we receive have nothing to do with ethical behavior. They are things like, the employee sitting next to me was wearing perfume or cologne that was a little too strong and it bothered me. Other complaints are more concerning. Things like, I don't think that employee was being honest in a particular transaction, or I'm concerned about a particular employee's behavior. And this is the manner in which we currently display that to our board of directors and our audit and risk committee. They do frequently ask significant questions and dive into some of the specifics, but this is in our mind the best transparent display that we have come up with at the present time. It may not be the perfect, and it may not be what we use going forward, but it actually seems to be working really well for us at the present time. And with that, Tammy, I think that covers essentially the construction of the ethics program. I will tell you that we are about 2 years into how we have constructed the ethics program here at Elevations, and we are learning still. The program is evolving every quarter, and I think we're on the right track. We have a good baseline for where we started, and I can tell you that based on our assessment now, I think we're substantially ahead of where we were when we started the process 2 years ago. We did receive, Tammy, a couple of questions prior to the session today regarding the pandemic and learnings or responses that we engaged in during the pandemic that either affected the leadership system or our ethical framework. Do you have any comments that you'd like to share to the group?
Yeah, I appreciate people sending things ahead of time. And so I just dropped a couple of concepts here which will be my last slide before we go into Q&A, that I thought would just be great to share. So a lot of what Brian has shared has been about our journey, and we've gotten a nicely established ethics program going on. I talked about the leadership system, and that's been going on, but we've had 2 years of a pandemic as well. And everybody has learned to do this great test for all of us, lots of lessons. And so I thought it would just be great to share a couple of things that we learned in the last couple of years, and some just concepts, because I don't know about y'all, but I didn't have a pandemic playbook that I just flipped to the page and came in every day and was like, and now we'll do this, and now we'll do that. There was so much unknown, and things are ambiguous, and it was hard to figure out what's real and data, and there was lots of opinions and all of it. So we all went through that experience. So here's a couple of key concepts that, as I reflect over the last couple of years, I think were really important, that I will think about as you build the playbook going forward, to be prepared for events that you can't be prepared for. And so here's what we learned. One of them was around engagement. So our organization, and Jerry talked about this in other forums as well, has always had really high engagement. We use Gallup, we use the 12 questions, we do surveys 2 times a year. It's great insight, as well as open comments, for us to know where we can do better and where we're doing well. And we have action plans, and you can learn more about that in the workforce category. But I have to say that I went into, with the pandemic, we actually ran the engagement survey about 4 to 6 weeks after the pandemic started. And I was one of those people that I was like, oh boy, we're going to tank on this one, because it's just an extremely stressful and ambiguous time for people. And when that's going on, and when you have concern and confusion, it could be very hard to be engaged. I was wrong. So this is really exciting. What I learned is that our engagement survey that we ran on our regular cycle throughout the pandemic actually had greater engagement results, all the way up to the 97th, I think, percentile in one of the surveys that came through. And we've always been the top decile, but that's the highest engagement we've ever had. And here's what I believe to be true. When things are hard, engagement actually can get better, because it really tests an organization to show what really matters and lean into some of the foundational elements that you build. And so for us, the EVP here is our employee value proposition, and our employee value proposition includes learning, purpose, caring, and results. And so we really practiced that we were a learning organization, because we didn't have the playbook. We learned through it, and we did it together. We leaned into being a purposeful organization where our mission and our values and what we were all about mattered, not just for our employees, but also for the members and for the community. And that was really important. So if you had purposeless work, I think those companies probably didn't make it through the pandemic in the same way that we did. I would say the biggest tenet, in my opinion, was that we demonstrated we were a caring organization. And so every act that we had was all done through a caring lens for our employees, members, and community. And, sometimes that meant sending care packages to somebody's house. It meant listening to our employees when they had concerns. It meant being, which I have another point here, as transparent as possible to explain what was going on, because it was all done out of caring and explaining why we came to some of the decisions that we did. And the cool news in this is that our results came along the way as well, right? We are a results-driven organization, but leaning into learning, purpose, and caring gave us in 2020 the best results we've had in a decade. It was an unbelievable year, and who knew, right? I couldn't have predicted that. Another key point that I think about the pandemic was that leader communication is key. I've read that before, I knew that, but I think that we took it so seriously that we were communicating sometimes in the very beginning daily. Like, here's the latest news, here's what we know, and here's what we don't know. And we'll tell you tomorrow when we do know, or here's what we kind of predict's coming out. And the transparency in what we communicated meant a lot to employees, and we heard that feedback. So communicating often, even when you don't think you have anything to say and you don't know if you can get it right, is extremely important. And it builds a lot of leadership trust, so that employees trust what leaders are saying. Because when you say you don't have all the answers, I mean, how can you disbelieve that, right? So it's important. For us, another lesson I think is just being open to change. We thought we had the answer right one day, and then like a week later, we're like, I don't think that was right. And so saying that we don't have all the answers, or saying we thought this, but now it's different, we learned something new, is totally okay. And it was a good practice item, I think, for us as an executive team, that we need to challenge one another in a safe space to see if we're being open-minded, if we're stuck in our ways. And trust me, I have got some stuck in my ways opinions, and I bet Brian does too, and some of the other leaders. And so we debate. And I think part of what works well for us as the leadership team is asking the question, being curious about, like, why do you believe that? Is it something else you're stuck on? And I'll tell you, things like remote work was a big one for us. We're a very in-person culture. And so when we swung the pendulum to say, everybody go home, or most everybody go home because our branches were still open, I was uncomfortable. And I'm getting more comfortable, but I'm also asking the question, and we ask one another, why are you uncomfortable? Is it because you don't trust them? Do you trust them? Is it because you don't see the work? Is it because you just miss their face? And some of that's all real, right? And it depends on the situation. So you have to be open in going through in something this to say, can I change my opinion, and why am I stuck in my ways? And that's also a part of learning. So that's where we learned in this process as well. And then I just threw this other one in here too, because I think there was a pivotal moment in our journey over the last couple of years, that it was related to remote work, where, we didn't have it all right. So recognizing you don't have it all right can be really important. And I will tell you, as a leadership team, we came out with our views on working remotely and what our expectations are, because I know our teams were looking for some clear answers. And so we tried to do that. We stated what our opinion was and what our policy would be about how much time you can be at home versus in the office, which wasn't a bad policy at the time. But the way that we delivered it came out totally like a lead balloon. It came out like maybe condescending, or we didn't trust people because we were trying to be cute about the topic. And the one thing that's great about our employees, whether we like it or not, is they will tell us, right? Like, that landed really badly. Brian's laughing at me. And we have lots of forums, whether they are formal through surveys or informal through just conversations. We hear when we don't do well. And so there were some people, not everybody, I will just say, some people were like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Others were like, yeah, I didn't like that. You made me feel like you didn't trust me, or you made me feel like I was working at home and I wasn't working, and I was, and it was a great year of results. And so we, as a leadership team, I will tell you, took that very seriously. We had some dialogue around it, and our outcome from that was, we got to tell people that we didn't mean it that way. And it was not intended to come across the way it did. And while it was uncomfortable, and it showed a lot of vulnerability for our leadership team to say, I'm sorry, I kind of blew it on this one. In the end, what we learned is it actually created some greater trust, because I heard from some of our employees, like, I just have never seen a leadership team actually say that. And listen, we didn't do that for that reason. That was not an intended outcome. It was just really being authentic and genuine to say, we didn't get this one right. But the aftermath, or the after fact on it, was there were a lot of appreciation, and maybe even a little bit better trust with the leadership team, that we were able to say with a transparent fashion, didn't get it right, and I'm sorry about that, and we'll do better next time. And I learned a lesson. And it leads the way for people in the organization to also sometimes say, I didn't get it right. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Then you can give us questions on the leadership system. You can give us questions on the ethics program and the journey there, or even some of the pandemic stuff if you want. And so I think the easiest way to do this is, if you would mind using the button that does the raise hand. I'll try to watch for questions coming in, and let you speak and just ask the question live. Oh, great. Okay, it's working. Hi, Kathy. You're up.
Well, good morning. Thank you both so much. Wow, this is great. I have some questions about your leadership system. It's so integral to the workings of the organization. To what degree do you share this in your onboarding of new employees and or new leadership team members?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I haven't really thought about it from an onboarding perspective. So here's what we do. I would say before someone even knows that we have leadership system, that's part of our hiring process because the competencies matter so much. And so that's part of like the making sure we get the right people in the door. One of the things we do in the first 3 days, we have it's called new employee orientation for onboarding that all employees go through. Everyone does, whether you're a teller and you may be sitting next to the CEO, it's all in the same room. So you're hearing it together. We actually spend one full day talking about culture, but we spend most of our time on values there. Coming out of that though, within the first couple of weeks, people are setting goals with their leader in our performance management system. And that's where competencies come into play. I actually think you just gave me an idea that we probably could be a little bit more thoughtful and very clear about the competencies, even on the onboarding, if we haven't done that more specifically. One of the other things you could learn about if you jump into the workforce session that happens later in the afternoon is some of our talent practices bring those into play. So performance management for us, we encourage conversations to happen at least quarterly around competencies. So that's another place where people can hear about it. And then we do something that's in the middle of the year called a talent review, or talking talent actually. And that's our opportunity for leaders to talk about how our employees are demonstrating some of these behaviors and showing up. And so that's another place where you can see it. I actually think somebody else had a hand up first and it went away. I'm going to jump over to you, John. But if I think somebody else had another hand up, if you could do it again, I'll come back.
Thank you. I also have a question about your leadership system, and that is, I really like particularly the pie chart element of it. I think that makes a lot of sense. But how do you assess that? How do you know that you avoid the sort of natural urge to work back into what's comfortable, which is operations and doing stuff? So how do you really assess that your various levels are really doing what we expect them to do?
Yep, that's the trick of the whole thing. It's an excellent question. So a couple of things that we do, John. One of them is on an annual basis, we'll do a refresh at the end of the year and look at all of the roles in the organization. So not the people, but the role. And we'll say, do we have them charted into the right place, right? So is there somebody who is really more of a planner versus a leader based on their role and what their expectation is around the role that they're in? So we have a way to do that on an annual basis. And there's always a few people that we move around. The other part of it is because it's part of performance management, not only the end of the year, we're doing on annual evaluations at the moment, which we're considering to do more frequent. Not only does it come into play there, but that talking talent that I talked about is an opportunity, like I said, where leaders in small groups are in a room talking cross-functionally. How does this person show up? So how does John demonstrate cultivating partnerships and relationships the way we need him to do that at the level that he's in? And we have no shortage of feedback. So that's actually how we hear how people are doing. And then what we do coming out of that is make sure that information is getting back to the individual that says, you know what, you're really doing a great job in building relationships with people you work for, but your peers don't feel that way. And that's how you constantly assess, and we work towards development in those areas. So I think the whole trick of it is to make sure that you're doing on a reoccurring basis through the forums that we have that are formal. And I will also say that we're not shy in sharing feedback along the way as well. So if a meeting goes really well or really bad, where somebody maybe demonstrated some behaviors, it's our responsibility to go to someone and say, I don't know if you're having a bad day, but that wasn't the best in you. And here's some things you can think about. And so we try to practice that as well and get comfortable doing it.
And I will say it does take some adjustment. I came to the organization with this expectation that I was just going to be doing legal work all day. And I quickly learned that that isn't what the expectation was, and that's not what the organization needed. And so to your point, John, it does take some refreshing and reminding sometimes to remember where we should be spending our time and effort and what provides the greatest value to the organization.
Who else has a question?
I have a question.
Hi, Michael.
Hey guys. To both you and Tammy and Brian, we're starting to create a complaint management program here at the QSO, and curious about, maybe I missed it during the conversation earlier, what are some guiding principles to a program and implementation of something like that? You know, just in case we ever got a complaint, just curious, well, what those guiding principles are that, you know, for our crew getting that put together.
You know, first and foremost, Michael, and this is something I'll be happy to spend some time with you after the session today, and because obviously what you saw on the screen is, and what we talked about was just kind of the bare bones. The complaint management system truly is the significant framework for the ethics program, being able to track what kind of feedback we're getting so that we can address those things when they come up. But timely response is probably the most important. First, response, and second, being timely with that response are probably the two most important factors. And we struggled with that initially because we were very disjointed. I mean, we get complaints in the retail branches. When somebody's not happy with the teller, they'll walk over to the branch manager. We get complaints that somebody's doesn't want to submit to us directly, so they will send it to our regulator. We get letters to our CEO. We get complaints on social media or comments on social media, both positive and negative. And it was a matter of being able to aggregate all of that information in a usable manner that we could analyze and track. That is, in my opinion, the crux of being able to do it effectively. We have gotten to the point that I think we are doing it effectively, although we're striving to be better and better in the way we do this, and you know, responding quicker. But that voice of the member spreadsheet that I talked about, we review that daily. And if there are complaints that are not getting the attention they need, or a member has not responded, we will escalate it and provide some other type of outreach to the member so that we can resolve as many of those or all of those that we can. Obviously, there will be members, or there will be times that individuals just will not cooperate and will not respond to you, and you have to recognize that for what it is. But we do make an effort to quickly and effectively reach out to every person that provides a response, even those on social media. So,
Michael, I'll add too from the employee side that no matter which way somebody comes in with a complaint, whether they use the anonymous tool or they put their name in the tool or they tell their manager or they tell an HR business partner, it doesn't really matter. We're going to look into it. And I think that that's really important from an employee standpoint, to make sure that you take this stuff seriously and then you look into it. You might find out in the end that it really was something that wasn't substantiated, or that the employee's struggling of something else, and you can work through that. But I think what's really important is to make sure that people know they have a place to share an opinion, their voice, and never shut it down, right? Because what I never want to err on the side personally, and Brian, I know you agree with me on this one, is that I don't want to ever discourage somebody who has something that could be ethically wrong and doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to say it. Like, I would rather always err on the side of we will look into it because it could be something there. And that's the way to engage your employees and community and your members in the right way, but also make sure that you don't slip up.
and that also reflects how we display it to the board of directors and the audit and risk committee. If there is any comment or complaint that even potentially could touch upon an ethical consideration, we display the actual comment to our audit and risk committee to evaluate. But I'd
Thank you.
be happy to spend some time with you and give you further details on that.
Appreciate it, Brian. Thank you both.
You bet. Hey, it looks like Jen has a question.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for this great presentation, great work, lots of learning, great things to take away. I wanted to touch base on social media really quick. So as a public hospital district, we are now looking at a more robust strategy and way to kind of capture and have an archival system for our social media complaints and comments and things of that nature. And I'm just curious about your archival system and your records retention request and what kind of system are you using? Because we're looking at a couple different vendors and we're bumping it up against some security questions related to like multi-factor and things of that nature. So I was just kind of curious as to what you're doing in terms of social media and your archival practices. So thanks.
That is an excellent question. I can tell you that the folks that we actually have manage that voice of the member spreadsheet that aggregate the information from a variety of sources are way smarter than I am. And I know that they manage that information effectively, but I actually do not know what tool is utilized to store that information or archive it for future use. Tammy, I mean, I know what's inserted on the voice of the member spreadsheet. It is accessible to all of leadership, and it is something that we can view, and it is archived on an ongoing basis. But I do not know what is done for the social media part of that. Tammy, do you happen to know?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either, but we can get it. So let's take note of that and maybe we can follow up with Jen on what that is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for looking into that. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to
Sure.
put your contact information in the chat, one of us will reach back out to you and give you that specific answer.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Of course.
Other questions? John, you have one?
Yeah, I'll come back again. Thanks. So I really appreciate that you all are doing this. We've actually done some work with your Chief Information Officer, Pete. He's helping us in some things. And one of the things that I think is sort of similar to our organization, your organization, is we really focus on being kind and listening and caring. And one of the things that I think we have to be careful of is some people will confuse kindness with weakness. Like you can walk all over us because we're nice people. I'm curious from a leadership perspective, what's your, and this is going to kind of mix a little bit in the workforce, but what's your turnover rate and what typically makes people leave the organization?
That's not only a good question, it's a tricky question. Because I think we're all feeling a little bit of a talent swap right now. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, and that's just real. We can be a great organization and people still leave. So I want to start a little bit with one of your questions, with a little bit of your point about kindness and caring, and tell you that I think one of the most caring things that a person can do and that a boss can do is be clear and hold people accountable around expectations. Like it is, feedback can be the most caring thing possible, even though it totally sucks when you're hearing it, right? But it's almost a disservice if you're not being honest and open about how somebody's showing up or how they're performing. So you can do both. That's really an important point. If people know what's expected of them and they're clear about how they're doing, it could be the most caring approach to make somebody successful. On the turnover side, unfortunately, we follow a little bit of the industry trends that are going on. When we started the pandemic, things slowed down immensely. I mean, the year 2020 really for us was very low turnover. You see higher turnover for us in the hourly roles, just like you would expect in other industries and less in the exempt. We came out of 2020 being fairly low teens, kept moving up, and we've been creeping up along the way. Right now, we're at the highest turnover we ever had. And some of that is, it's just time that people want to move on to something else. Some people are, just like you read about the Great Resignation, we've got it too. And there's reasons that people are making decisions to move on. It's important for us and it's problematic for us, I'll tell you. So it's something that we're focusing on, but we still feel turnover. Here's what I think is most interesting though, in that. When people leave our organization, we do exit interviews. Some of them are just, one-on-one to learn more about that and make sure that we understand clearly why people are leaving. But we also use a third party who reaches out and understands, who's not biased, right? Who does not the manager or an HR business partner asking questions about why you left. So we gain a lot of important data from that. Often for a 600-person company, often it's related to moving, career growth, when we just don't have a position that they can step into and an opportunity they just can't pass up. And it's usually not one thing either, right? It's kind of a combination of this and that, and you kind of bring it together and at the same time to get more money, right? So we can't solve all those things, but there's two questions that are extremely interesting to me when somebody leaves our organization that we ask. One of them is, would you come back? Because would you, and we actually have a lot of rehires. I will tell you that's something else that we track that is extremely interesting. So it's like, right now I've got to go to this other job. It's been my lifelong dream. My husband's moving. I don't know. It could be anything, but yeah, I'd come back. And that tells us that it was a great experience. I'm not running from something. I'm running to something. And my manager wasn't the problem. We really read into that. So that's one. The second question I think is really interesting, and there's a benchmark and we're way above that, is would you tell your friend to work here? Would you recommend this place? Because I can tell you that if you've left an organization that you hated, you will do it a big disservice because you'll be like, don't ever work there. You'll go on Glassdoor and you'll say that. You'll tell your friends, don't ever work at that place. We don't have that. And so, not perfectly. There's some people that are just like, yeah, I didn't like that place. It wasn't for me. And that's okay. But for the majority of the time, we're, I think, about 20% higher than a benchmark in both those questions, that I'll come back if I can. Keep me in touch, maybe the opening is there. And two, yeah, I would absolutely tell my friend. And we have a big referral program that kind of feeds into that as well. So I wish that I could solve the turnover. I don't have the turnover solved, but I do think these other elements are just really important.
I think we do have to acknowledge that, but certainly within the last year, that a desire for fully remote work is certainly a factor as well. That is something that we are hearing not infrequently. It's just an expectation that has come out of the pandemic.
Yeah. What other questions do you have? Go ahead, Kathy.
It's not a question, Tammy, but I just wanted to say to you and Brian, I really appreciated your slides and that you spent a lot of time on the slides. You can tell that you were sharing the content. It was, for me to be taking notes and absorbing, it was very helpful. So I just really appreciate your presentation.
You are most welcome.
Thank you. I know the virtual setting is not always ideal, so thanks for paying attention. We appreciate that.
Yeah. We were hoping to see you in person.
Oh, great. Nick. You may be on mute there.
Oh, I'm mute.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. We've been following your journey for a long time, and we just applied for our Baldrige Award this last year, and we're still waiting to hear. But we piggyback a lot of your best practices, I think, as a credit union, and so just thank you so much for your guys' journey and for sharing always. We also both use Jan Johnson, and she's just wonderful, and her team is wonderful. One thing we're working on, though, that you hit on is this complaint management process. And I feel like we've gone through lots of renditions. And can you just tell me from a front end perspective, we're trying to get to the point where we're getting a lot of that data, right, and categorizing it and making sure that we can narrow it down based on analysis and having really good reporting on the end. But, we don't want garbage in and garbage out. So how are you making this process for your frontline people more maybe user friendly on the front end, so we can just at least collect all the information, on issues and complaints and things like that? And then, how does that, can you just kind of walk me through, or how do you create it good on the front end where you're getting good information and not garbage, you know what I mean? So that,
Yes.
good reporting on the back end.
I will admittedly tell you, Nick, that we have taken an approach kind of like Tammy intimated, that even if it's potentially, and I'm not saying this is the best approach, but it's the approach that we believed, especially for the front end on the ethics program journey, that we wanted to take to make sure we were covering everything. We've taken a very conservative view and been willing to accept a comment on anything, even if it didn't necessarily pertain to something that we would normally consider to be ethical behavior. And we will nevertheless receive those comments, analyze those comments. We have created a number of mechanisms that, again, I'll be happy to display for you on a one-on-one basis and show you more about, where we've facilitated our retail staff being able to submit comments that are collected in a certain place. We have trained our staff to provide those comments on a proactive basis. And it's really I would say the magic is in the aggregator. We have a very bright individual who is the officer at the credit union that aggregates all that information and slices and dices that information and categorizes that information and gives the first level review to determine whether something could potentially pertain to ethical considerations and or not. And in the event that it is not considered to be an ethical consideration, it is nevertheless viewable by the ethics committee if we desire to see those things. But that is the approach that's worked best for us, to take a deeper cut that probably in those comments and feedback pools than probably we would need to, just to make sure that we cover everything. And the comments come in from our, as I said, our regulator, from direct correspondence, from social media, from our employees relating those, and from our members who send them in on NPS surveys, who on internal communications directly to the credit union.
You all have you have a centralized system then, where all, because I mean, we do Medallia, MLG, we have all these different systems where our voice of the member essentially comes from, but the integration of that is difficult. Do you do that with like Microsoft Power BI, or what is your kind of aggregate platform?
I will tell you that much of it at this point is manual. It's receiving. The gentleman, his name is Kawogi, he actually receives all of that information from all of those various channels. There is no central technology system that takes that information and assimilates it into a common form. We actually have to be prepared to receive that information through all of those various systems, because if we didn't, we would be blind to some of that feedback. So I'd love to tell you that there's a silver bullet out there that you could use that would actually solve that issue, but much of it is manual, and I'm not going to say that we wouldn't look at a technology solution if there is some sort of a CRM type solution that would allow us to receive all that in a common way, but right now we haven't found it. So
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your guys' process and stuff. It really does help. Thank you.
you're welcome, Nick.
Go ahead, Theron.
Greetings, everybody, and thanks again for all of your help. I have a question going almost back to the very first slide, where you talked about the roles at different levels of the organization, all the way from top of the organization. And I think it was strategist. I didn't write that down. I wanted to, and all the way to frontline performer. So describe to me then what the role is for supporting process improvements. If I'm really talking about how senior leaders are kind of supporting the organization and making sure that process improvement is alive and well and doing that work. What does that look like at each level for the architect, planner, and leader?
What I will tell you is that we have, because of this journey that we've been on and using this framework, there's a responsibility for everybody to be doing process improvement, no matter what role it is. So you might not find that in a particular competency, but it is kind of just the way that we're wired and how we do our work, which is when you're doing your job, is there a better way to do this? And what improvements can you bring into play? So here, for an example, I can look at some of the practices that I've talked about, even with determining competencies on an annual basis. Yeah, I was doing that ad hoc and I'm the CPO, right? So what I found was that I need to do that in an operational rhythm that lines up with development opportunities. In other words, align up the competencies with the role and make sure I understand that so that then we can have conversations about where people need to develop. And if that's not done at the beginning of the year, and so January is my month now, that was an improvement I brought in this year. I need to do that and bring that in. And it's also true with individual contributors. So you can take a process that's out there that, I have a great one from yesterday. We've got a lot of bilingual speakers at our organization. We've been focused on that. And we didn't have a great process in place for onboarding them and then letting them know where to get involved to help some of our Hispanic community. And that it's just kind of been loose. And so guess what? Somebody brought it to my attention. And even as an individual contributor, we're always looking to get better and looking for those opportunities of like, okay, let's build that into a process. And then that process turns into using our BPM like process maps, and then it's communicating it. So it's kind of the wiring of our organization that we do that on a regular basis. And so it's not necessarily even tied to the competency. I think it's just the expectation that everybody is part of this journey to always improve. And that's what being part of this Baldrige community is all about. And I think we've got it in us now to just keep going.
So as you were getting started, how did you know that leaders were out doing that? I mean, I get it. You've evolved and you've integrated and you've gotten that far, but a lot of organizations might not be where leaders are comfortable doing that level of work or even know what to do in those roles. So were there some learnings along the way that kind of got you thinking about, our architects might need to stay out of the way because they don't really know the work processes. And if they go in and start telling people what to do, that's really not what we want. Was there some key learnings around those kinds of things maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple of ways to do it that don't sound like a leader is telling you to do it differently, which is really important, right? What you want to do is get really curious about the processes that you're using or look for where there could be an improvement. So simply asking a question about like, how are we doing that? How do we ensure that nothing falls through the crack there? And learning from the people that are closest to the work. I think that I can think back on a couple of examples where I've been really pleasantly surprised that if I just ask the question, somebody will come up with an idea of like, I am manually putting that in place. I think we could probably do an automation and do a workflow into that. And, there's an art to leadership, right? Where especially as somebody gets more mature in their leadership skills of asking questions and being curious versus telling somebody what to do. And sometimes it's the most motivating and challenging in a really good way experience for a person to be able to say, I have this idea, or you maybe think about it differently. And therefore I think we could make this change. I think that's a piece of it. We talk about innovation and we have an innovation program here. Some ideas get sparked through that, which is really important as well. And then I think the other flip side of this is recognizing and celebrating when people have made great improvements. We do that. We have opportunities, I think, or we have examples, for example, in the fraud department where we have really used a lot more automation, and we highlight those examples and share the amazing impact it's had on detecting fraud, for example, in this case, because we use some systems and leverage some of our technology and have done things better. And so it's all part of that process of just encouraging the activity to happen as a leader and then celebrating it when it does take place.
I also hear some of Jerry's initial comments of just creating trust.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that it all goes back to that trust, and with that curiosity and trust together, you probably are creating that environment where people feel comfortable doing that work. So I really appreciate the allowance to follow up on a couple of those points, and thanks for answering the question.
Yeah, and Jerry said it well. It is always about trust, because if someone believes you're asking a question to learn and to make improvements, but not criticizing necessarily, you'll get so much more out of your employees.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
So related to the question that Jen previously asked, I did have from one of our very effective team members here, I did get a Teams chat letting me know that the tool that is used to basically monitor and track the social media traffic is called Hootsuite, HOOTSUITE. And it's a relatively effective tool that I know the team sounds like they're pretty happy with.
Hi, Heather, go ahead.
Thank you for that.
You are welcome.
Hi, Tammy. Hello, Brian.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my question. Tammy, you alluded to the fact that you perform annual performance reviews earlier in a response that you gave. We also do annual performance reviews, and I've seen numerous articles about doing away with formal performance reviews. And so I'm just curious, I think you mentioned you were looking at maybe even a more frequent check-in of performance reviews. Would love to just hear your philosophy on that, and maybe even just high level what that would look like for you and the organization.
Yeah, we're kind of on that journey right now. I think our performance management, like there's some really good things in it currently, and there's just really good opportunity to make it better also. So I think one of the learnings that we've had as we kind of look at our system is that we set goals and we align them, and we have a good understanding starting the year that's been good, but people don't really go back into our performance management system on a regular basis. And that is telling, right? Instead, they have conversations with their leader and how am I doing? And not just on the competency side, but also the work, right? They're too static. And there's a lot of literature, you can look into that. Marcus Buckingham has a lot out there. I worked at another company where we actually took ratings out. So we are looking at trying to solve a couple of things. One, make performance management, or at least those conversations and goals, much more meaningful and much more frequent and relevant to the work that's currently taking place. I think with the feedback mechanisms that we have on like the competencies and how the behaviors show up, that's pretty good. It's more about the goal thing that just seems just too static. One of the challenges is always like the disconnection between, or figuring out how to unwind merit and reward from performance. Because if you're doing these things frequent, then how are you doing comp, right? And so there's lots of literature on how to do better with that, but we have some ideas about having more frequent conversations, having more meaningful goals, having that more on a regular basis, bringing values into the conversation, because we've gotten a little bit just not as prominent in talking about our values on a regular basis. That is an opportunity to do that. There's a couple of companies that we've looked at that are figuring this out, different than when I did it 5 years ago. I've been moving ratings, but it's gotten so much better that there's actually some good companies. Baxter's one of them. I was at another conference that shared some ideas that I think we can just do so much better. So Heather, we're in the middle of that journey right now, figuring out the best way to do that, to make meaningful conversations a little bit more frequent and more relevant for our employees to get aligned, as well as our leaders to have clear expectations, as well as support when it comes to goals. I'd be happy to share our journey with you if you want to reach out separately too.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, do. Jen, looks like you have another question.
I do. So it's very interesting, the concept around performance reviews and, here at Mason Health, our philosophy is that, we have one-on-one meetings with our staff and we have our team huddles. So by the time we get to the review, anything that they're hearing, if there needs improvement should not be a surprise, or, it's an opportunity to build a stronger relationship. And so my question is, when you're doing your one-on-ones, with your staff, like what are some best practices or some key learnings or some things that you get more bang for the benefit out of your one-on-one meetings?
Well, the first most important thing is have them. Right. There are some leaders who don't reach out to their employees on a regular basis and have one-on-one meetings. And sometimes that's a problem in and of itself. If they're in a production role and it's just kind of like driving forward, they might not be having the conversation. So that actually is step one. The other thing is, I think that what we're looking at, and we just haven't like rolled it out, we're kind of in the middle of that process, is using some kind of format that is relevant to the conversation. So maybe it's talking about what's working well and what do they need help on for that conversation, for the one-on-one. But the next conversation might be changed over to talking about behaviors or talking about values, and rotating through. And I think from an HR perspective, offering leaders those options and tools of how to have those conversations and use the one that's relevant at the moment could be one of the most important ways to make it meaningful for the employee, right? So if somebody is struggling, as an example, with some kind of work that's in front of them right now and they need some help, maybe having a conversation around values, it's not going to land the way that you want it to. You want to be in the right mindset to have that conversation. So the thing that I've kind of tapped into lately is offering options that work at the right time, making sure you're covering the bases over the year, right, through these conversations, but lining up with the connection between the manager and the employee for the most timely, relevant conversation that will help somebody move forward or understand, how they're showing up or how to get unstuck. That seems better to me than any of the static.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome. I think we're down to just the last 3 minutes. So does anybody have a last minute question? I don't want to keep anybody late. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and close this session down. I appreciate the questions, but it's really awkward when we just sit here. So thank you for asking them. Brian and I are resources. Our contact information, we'd be happy to share that. I think we'd love to share our learnings, both on what we've done and both of what we're figuring out and still haven't solved. I love being part of this community and being able to share ideas. It's just, it's a pleasure for us as well. So feel free to reach out outside.
There's only so much you can put in the slides, and we'd love to hear from you outside of the session. So.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank both of you. Have a great day.
Too.
Okay.